today's lecture starts from this section, trade and distribution of income. Changes in relative price can affect the earnings of labor and capital. We already studied. A rise in the price of Q1 raises the purchasing power of labor in terms of both goods, while lowering the purchasing power of capital in terms of both goods. We already studied that in the last lecture. A rise in the price of food has a reverse effect in 40. Thus, international trade can affect the distribution of income even in the long run. Owners of a country's abundant factors gain from trade. So we already studied this. But owners of countries' scarce factors lose. In the case of Korea, labor abundant country, owners of labor, workers, in other words, should be winners, whereas owners of land, scarce land, should be losers. Factors of production that are used intensively by the import competing industry. Import competing industry means import to happen, right? Domestic industry compete with import. In other words, comparative disadvantage, right? Industry. This should be hurt by the opening of trade. After free trade, so Q2 sector, producers of Q2 sector should be losers, regardless of the industry in which they are employed. Compared with the rest of the world, the US is abundantly endowed with highly skilled labor, while low-skilled labor is correspondingly scarce. In the case of the US, so this slide said US is abundant in high-skilled labor, while low-skilled labor is scarce factor. Then, international trade has the potential to make low-skilled workers in the US worse off, not just temporarily, but on the sustainable basis. Right? We can project that kind of thing. Slide number 42. Changes in income distribution occur with every economic change, not only international trade. Right? Changes in technology, changes in consumer preferences, exhaustion of factors, and discovery of new ones all affect income distribution. Economists put most of the blame on technological change and the resulting premium paid on education. So skilled workers receive higher wage than unskilled workers. That is a kind of wage premium as a major cause of increasing income inequality in the United States. It would be better to compensate the losers from trade than prohibit trade. Anyway, Heckscher model said there are winners and losers, but national welfare in total increased definitely, right? So we can compensate losers from trade, right? And this is an obligation of government, right? Instead of WTO or exporting country, partner country like this. The economy as a whole does benefit from trade. So anyway, even in Heckscher model, national welfare increase. Think about so earlier graph that utility function, right? After trade, consumers can touch higher utility level, right? So utility level, this economy can attain after trade minus utility level and autarky level. The gap between the two is gains from trade. I already explained. The economy as a whole does benefit from trade. This is a gap between the two indifference curves. And number 43. There is a political bias in trade politics. Potential losers from trade are better politically organized than the winners from trade. So usually winners from trade should be consumers and producers in comparative advantage sector. In numbers, usually consumers, right? And potential losers should be, for example in Korea, it's agricultural farmers. So in numbers, losers should be fewer than winners. Okay, but losers are usually concentrated among a few, but gains are usually dispersed among many. Each of you pays about $8 to predict the imports of sugar, and the total cost of this ballot is about $2 billion per year. So this benefit of this program total about $1 billion, but this amount goes to relatively fewer sugar producers. What is talking here? Now think about Korea. In case of Korea, agricultural farmers should be losers, right? Owners of land or agricultural farmers are losers. So in numbers, they are very few, right? But the cost from trade is very severe for each individual agricultural farmers. They lost their livelihood. Okay, they cannot survive. So because of this reason, losers are concentrated. So users have no collective action problem. In other words, they do collective action against free trade. Few numbers, and their cost is really serious, right? So they do some collective action, strike against some free trade policy, for simply talking. But now think about winners of free trade. Lots of people, millions of people. Then one person's benefit from free trade is not so large. As a group, increasing consumer surplus should be very large numbers. But from the one consumer's benefit of one consumer is very low. So they do not engage in collective action for free trade. So their voices are very silent, right? So if you look at newspaper, you can see only some angry voices of agricultural farmers and some activists, some groups. Okay? Because of that, protectionist policy is very popular and adopted frequently in spite of national welfare decrees. We studied this kind of idea in more detail in chapter 10. Okay, page 44. North-South trade and income. Over the last 40 years, countries like South Korea, Mexico, and China have exported to the U.S. goods intensively in unskilled labor, right? Labor-intensive products. At the same time, income inequality has increased in the United States, as wages of unskilled workers have grown slowly compared to those of skilled workers. In the U.S., skilled workers, wage rate in skilled workers or college-graduate workers, wage rate increased greatly. But wage rate in unskilled workers, their schooling years is less than 12, doesn't increase greatly. Anyway, increase, but a little. So wage gap between unskilled and skilled labor become widened and widened, right? So this exacerbation of some income distribution in the United States is propelled by some developing countries' exports to the United States. That is question for this. This is the former free trade with developing countries caused the United States income inequality exacerbated. That is the question, right? The Heckscher-Ohlin model predicts that owners of relative abundant factors will gain from trade. So United States is a skilled labor abundant countries, and owners of relatively scarce factor unskilled labor should lose from trade. Little evidence supporting this prediction exists. Anyway, there is some evidence for that, but there exists more important reason. Right? Number one, according to the model, a change in the distribution of income occurs through a change in output price, but there is no evidence of changing the price of skill-intensive goods, blah, 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 not important. Number two, according to the model, wages of unskilled workers should increase in unskilled labor abundant countries, blah, 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 not so important, to skip. Number three, anyway, this is a little bit tedious, so I'd like to skip North-South trade and income inequality. And next section is skill-based technological change and income inequality. This section skipped, not so important. And capital skill complementarity. Okay, I'd like to just check. Figure 5.12 shows that the trend towards low labor income share is worldwide phenomenon. You know, for example, Kopler's production function, Y equal AK beta L alpha, for example, right? The alpha is income share of labor, isn't it? This share, labor income share, decreases all over the world. That is a worldwide phenomenon, right? Experience in labor-abundant countries, including China and Mexico, to the same extent as it has been for capital-abundant countries, such as the United States. The evidence supports an explanation based on technological change within sectors, not increased import competition. So the main reason for this decreasing in labor income share all over the world happened because of technological change. Okay? Technological change often takes the form of new and better machines that displace unskilled workers but still requires skilled workers. So if we look at long-term history, why productivity or technological change happen, right? Anyway, this technological change often takes the form of new and better machine, right? So new or to cook pizza with new machine or better machine, then labor productivity increase. So wage rate increase like this. Okay, this generates higher returns for both capital and skilled workers while depressing the returns on skilled workers. So skilled workers should be okay. Anyway, their labor productivity increase and wage rate increase. But this kind of benefit not trickle down to unskilled workers. Okay? So increased automation can explain the observed worldwide increase in both wage inequality and the returns to capital, right? So automation, 자동화 in Korean, right? This is another reason of wage inequality, right? And returns to capital. Okay, then you go factor price equalization. So in the organization part, FPE is section 5, but in our textbook explained in section 7 actually. Section 6, like this. So what is factor price equalization? Look at this. Actual model, weak version and strong version, price version and quantity version. We already studied all of this one, right? This is weak version of actual model. Strong version of actual model is this factor price equalization. What's the meaning of factor price equalization? Labor price, wage rate, equalized all over the world, right? After trade. Trade results in equalization of wage rate all over the world, partner countries, right? Or rental rate of land is equalized all over the world. Now think about this kind of idea. So when I'm explaining abundance, Korea is a labor abundant country, Australia is land abundant country, then wage rate in home should be lower than wage rate in Australia, right? And the rental rate of land in Australia cheaper than that of Korea. Very expensive in Korea. Land price is very high in Korea, right? Because land is scarce country, but wage rate is the opposite case. Then, factor price equalization theorem said, after trade, what happened? Wage rate, after trade, wage rate in Korea become equal to wage rate in Australia, right? And the rental rate of land in Korea should be equal to rental rate of Australia. That kind of thing happened. That is a factor abundance condition, isn't it? Before that, we know originally WA should be lower than wage star in Australia. rental rate of land expensive than rental rate of land in Australia. So that kind of thing, because Korea is labor abundant, Australia is land abundant. But after trade, that kind of thing happen, right? That is factor price equalization. Unlike the Ricardian model, the Heck-Sholin model predicts that factor price will be equalized among countries that trade. Okay? That is quite different from Ricardian model. Wage rate in developed countries should be higher than developing countries anyway, because different labor productivity. After trade, this wage gap continues. Okay? But Heck-Sholin model, strong version of Heck-Sholin model said equalized, factor price equalized. How that happened? Free trade equalized relative output price. We know that in autarky price, right? In our earlier numerical example. So think about P1, P1A, P2A is cheaper than P1 star A, autarky price, or P2 star A, right? We know that in our numerical example, in Ricardian model, relative price of comparative advantage good Q1 in Korea, that was half, right? And autarky price of foreign, that was 2 in our numerical example, right? After trade, that what happened? In Korea, relative price of comparative advantage would increase half to 1. Right? Foreign case, relative price of good one in terms of good. Actually, this is a relative price of comparative disadvantage good in Australia, right? This one should decline, so 2 to 1, so equalized, right? That happened in the Ricardian model and Heck-Sholin model, right? Due to the connection between, so this kind of thing also happened in Heck-Sholin model, and we already studied the Stolper-Samuelson SS curve. One-to-one relationship between relative price and relative factor price, right? Because of this, factor prices are also equalized. That is a factor price equalization theory. Trade increased the demand of goods produced by relatively abundant factors, comparative advantage goods price, right? Demand for Q1 increase in home. Why? Australian household demand, Korea produced Q1. Indirectly increasing the demand of these factors, raising the price of relatively abundant factors. So we know that after free trade, in Korea, Q1 increase, right? And Q2 decrease. If we use production function, Q1 is L1, T1 or K1, Q2 is Q2, L2, K2 is N. In Korea, after trade, Q1, production of Q1 increase, production of Q2 decrease. Right? What's the meaning of this? More production of output means more use, more employment, more demand for factors. Right? Increasing value of output, increasing value of output means increasing value of input, isn't it? Right? So labor input increase and capital input, employment increase. Demand for labor and capital increase in Korea. But we know that Q1 is labor intensive sectors. So employment increasing labor demand or employment of labor increase, jump, for example. This one increased greatly. But demand for capital anyway increase, but not so spectacular at all. How about what happened in Q2? Q2 decrease, right? That means labor input, employment decrease, K2 decrease. But this one is more influential, overwhelm the effect of decrease in labor demand, isn't it? Okay, that is explained here. Trade increases demand of goods produced by relatively abundant factors. So this one indirectly increasing the demand for labor or labor employment. This raises the price of labor. So wage rate increase. Because of this one increased greatly. Decrease in labor demand in sector 2 insignificantly. So if we think both things together, labor demand increased greatly, but labor supply is fixed, right? So wage rate should increase. That is explained here. And demand capital decrease, right? Demand for capital or employment capital decrease at national level. So rental rate of capital stock decrease, right? Originally, wage rate is very low. Rental rate of land, very, very expensive in Korea, right? But what happened? Wage rate increase. This one. Wage rate increase, right? Wage rate increase in home and rental rate of land in Korea decrease. The opposite thing happened in Australia. So factor price equalized. That is a mechanism why factor price equalization happened. In the real world, factor price are not equal across countries. If we look at actual data, in real data, wage rate still lower than Australia. Korea's wage rate is still lower than Australia. Rental rate of land in Korea is more expensive than that in Australia. So factor price are not equalized. This kind of thing doesn't happen, doesn't happen, right? So factor price equalization is theoretically correct, but in the actual world, we cannot see factor price equalization, okay? The model, then why factor price are not equalized, okay? So you have to understand why factor price are not equalized, okay? The model assumes that trading countries produce the same good. Number one reason is this one, right? So we assume that both countries, home and foreign, produce the same Q1 and same Q2, same good, right? But in real world, two countries produce different good actually, right? Not heterogeneous good, right? But countries may produce different goods if their factor price ratio radically differ, right? So because of this, wage rate and rental rate of land are not equalized. Number one reason is this, okay? Two countries produce different goods, differentiated goods. Number two, the model also assumes that trading countries have the same technology. That is the basic assumption of actual model, isn't it? Two countries, production function same. Production function of Q1 and Q2 same, respectively, in home and foreign, right? That is basic assumption, but that is not true. Think about Ricardian model. Two countries have produced two goods with different technology, right? Because of this, factor price are not equalized, okay? But different technologies could affect the productivity of factors, and therefore the wage rate paid to these factors. Two countries have different marginal product of labor, different marginal product of capital stock, right? So wage rate and rental rate of land different, okay? Like Ricardian model, assuming different technology, okay? Actually, number two is most important reason for that. Now look at table 5.1, comparative advantage, comparative international wage rate. When the United States is 100, that Germany is higher than United States. South Korea's wage rate is 60% of United States level. India is just less than 5% of United States level in like this. Wage rate different. Wage rate are not equalized because all of these countries have different labor productivity, different technology. Okay? So why some skilled labor receive higher wage than unskilled labor? Different productivity. More productive, so you receive higher wages. Right? Same thing. Next slide. The model also ignores trade barriers and transportation costs. Ricardian and Heckscher early model assumed that there exists no trade barriers, no transportation costs. But in real world, there exist trade barriers. For example, tariffs. If some countries impose high tariff when that country import Korean electronic products. Okay? So prices are not equalized because of tariff and non-tariff barriers. Okay? Number two, transportation costs. So our prices, mobile phone prices, for example, $100. When this one exported to China, just transportation cost added, so $110. But we export same good to some Chile or Peru, right? Transportation cost is more expensive than the other case, right? So maybe $130 like this. Because of this, factor price are not equalized. Anyway, differences in technology, number two reason is most important. The model predicts outcomes for the long run, but economy liberalized trade factors production may not quickly move to the industries that intensively use abundant factors. Final reason why FP are not happen, this one, right? So we assume that so movement of factors, right? We can quickly move. Movement of factors is possible, but sometimes that is not true, right? So factors of production, for example, labor may not quickly move to the industries that intensively use abundant factors. So now think about this. After trade, Korean production of car increase, production of agriculture decrease. Then earlier agricultural farmers have a new job in automakers, for example, Hyundai Motors, for example, right? But that is not possible. Our average age of agricultural farmers is almost 70, isn't it? They cannot get a job in manufacturing sector. So factor movement, right? Factor movement across industries, more comparative towards comparative advantage sectors is really difficult in real world. Because of that, something happened. Okay? Okay, I'd like to stop here and we start a new one. Okay, now we study empirical evidence on Heckscher model. Anyway, economists, you have to find empirical evidence if theory is correct or not. If we believe, we support some theory, right? Theory should be tested empirically. So that this section is related to that kind of job. Empirical evidence on the Heckscher model. Test on US data. Using US data, some economists test Heckscher model is valid or not. Leontiev is a famous economist in 1960s, I think. He found that US exports were less capital intensive than US imports. What's the meaning of this? Exports happen in comparative advantage sector, right? And export sector or comparative advantage sectors in the United States were less capital intensive than US imports. US imports competing sector means comparative disadvantage sector, right? That is just the opposite from our earlier understanding on Heckscher model. United States capital intensive industry, so exports were more capital intensive than some US imports or capital intensity in imports. Okay, but the opposite thing happened. Even though the United States is the most capital abundant country in the world, so we said Leontiev paradox. Why capital intensive United States imports capital intensive goods and exports labor intensive goods. Okay, that is Leontiev paradox. Right. So this data, this Leontiev paradox, reconfirmed by another economist, Bowman, Riemer, and this guy. These guys using global data instead of United States data, right? They They tested the Hex-Ohlin model on data from 27 countries, usually developed countries, industrial countries actually, and confirmed Leontief paradox on international level. They also found Leontief paradox on international level. Developed countries export labor-intensive goods and import capital-intensive goods, for example, like this. Okay? So now look at that. This paradox should be explained. Okay? That is, we can explain using table 5.2 why, how Leontief paradox can be solved. So this is a calculation of factor contents of the U.S. exports and imports for 1962, right? Factor contents. So as I said before, when we export output, for example, Q1, then value of Q1 is P1, Q1, isn't it? Right? So in physical terms, Q1 exported. This one is decomposed in labor content and capital content based on this kind of production function, L1 and K1. Okay? So Q1, value of Q1 is equal to combined content of labor and labor content plus capital content. Okay? So if we calculate content in comparative disadvantaged sectors or imports or exports or comparative advantage sectors, right? Capital per million. Capital is, now think about capital content in comparative disadvantaged sector greater than capital content in export. Okay? So this law confirms Leontief paradox. Also, now look at labor per $1 million. Labor content in exports greater than labor contents than import. So Leontief paradox again. So now we can calculate the capital labor ratio, right? This one divided by this one, then we can get this one. Okay? Anyway, these three laws explain, confirms Leontief paradox. Okay? So that is Leontief paradox. But why this kind of Leontief paradox happen? We can solve Leontief paradox using the other two laws. Look at this. Until now, we think just this kind of production function, right? But actually, production function in more detail, Q1 is, for example, unskilled labor, right? Simple labor or unskilled labor, and skilled labor or human capital or capital stock. And also, more important thing is technology, productivity level, isn't it? That is general type of production function, right? So that is labor contents, okay? That is capital content. So capital abundant United States export labor intensive products and import capital intensive products. That is the explanation of these three laws, right? But now think about fourth law, average years of education per worker. Average years of education, schooling years, simply talking. Schooling years, right? Schooling years is an indicator of human capital. Indicator of human capital. Okay? So human capital content in exports greater than human capital content in import. What's the meaning of that? United States is human capital abundant country. So US exports human capital intensive products to the other countries. Okay? That is this one. So we know that actually we just focus on this kind of a production function only, simplistic production function only. So Leontief paradox happen. But we use this one. This one is really, really important one. Can you understand? And Hex-Ohlin model valid. Human capital abundant US exports human capital intensive production. Okay? So Hex-Ohlin model correct. And finally, look at this. Proportion of engineers and scientists in workforce. Proportion of engineers and scientists in workforce. Right? So scientists scientists and engineers. What is this? This is a indicator of R&D effort. R&D, you know R&D, research and development, right? Research and development. Or simply talking, technology level, right? Technology level of one country is indicated by this one, for example, engineers and science, numbers of engineers and scientists, or share of engineers and scientists in total labor. That is indicator of technology in production side. Okay? The other indicators of technology level is R&D share in GDP. R&D share in GDP. Okay? Most of countries who showing high engineer scientist share or R&D share means higher technology than partner countries. Okay? So what's the meaning of this? This number is, this content of this one is greater in exports than imports. Simply talking, United States is productivity or technology abundant countries. So US exports high productivity growth and import the others, for example. Can you understand? Still, then what happened? What happened? Leontief paradox solved again, right? So Leontief paradox is starting from this simplistic production function and calculation of vector content, right? But this one and this one is really important one. Now think about Cobb-Douglas production function. So y equal q equal a k alpha l 1 minus alpha like this, right? That is technology variable. That is this one, right? United States is a high technology country, so they export this kind of good. Also, in more detail, some more general Cobb-Douglas production function is like this. A, right? A, H, K, something, 1 minus alpha, and K alpha, A, K alpha, H, K, 1 minus alpha, and alpha like this, right? Then, human capital abundant country, developing country usually featured by high technology and human capital. Okay? If we look at sources of long-term economic growth over time, we can see, right? Firstly, GDP increased greatly because capital accumulation in the early stage of development. UK, United States, or Korea in 1960s experienced this kind of thing. Capital accumulation increased, right? Capital, numbers of capital increased, then labor productivity increased, leading to high technology, right? After that, what happened? The other, in the per capita GDP increases. Next, some sources of growth is human capital accumulation, right? So schooling years increase. Some workers, some schooling years increase. Until 1980s, most of schooling years is most Korean workers are less some high school workers. But now most workers are university workers. That is a human capital, right? Human capital means workers, some productivity increase because of education or because of experience. Okay, I'm sorry, on-the-job training, right? Workers' productivity increase via education or via OJT, right? The education increase each individual's some productivity, general job skills, simply talking. But on-the-job training usually funded by some company because labor's increasing productivity fully captured by one firm-specific technological changes. Think about firm-specific technological changes, right? So that firm, some fund or this OJT program, Okay? But education means general job skills, right? Productivity, general job skills. So after education, you can enhance your some critical thinking skill, analytical thinking skills, or logical thinking skills, and mathematical some skills, and some the others. Okay? Problem solving skill, job skills, increase general job skills, general problem solving skills apply to many tasks and or helpful to your life problem, solving life problem, right? This one increase, so productivity increase. OJT means on-the-job training, right? Productivity increase only in some forms production only. There are two things, right? So anyway, the second source of long-term economic growth is a human capital accumulation, right? Finally, some technology, this kind of thing. So research and development and some technology directly, right? That is this kind of thing. So, and now in the United States also focus on, you hear that, some social capital over human capital. Social capital means trust, right? Lots of people work together with trust. So no transaction cost at all. So increase productivity. Anyway, that kind of thing. So sequentially, sources of long-run economic growth changes. Capital to human capital to technology. Okay? Okay, now we go next slide. Estimated technological efficiency. So technology level is quite different. When United States technology level is 1, then Japan is 0.7, and Bangladesh is just 3% of United States level. Right? Hong Kong is just 40% of United States level. This is old data, a paper published in 1995. Anyway, productivity different. Okay? If we ignore this kind of thing, problem happen. Because the Hack-Shawlin model predicts that factor price will be equalized across trading countries, it also predicts that factors of production will produce and export a certain quantity of goods until factor price are equalized. In other words, a predicted value of services from factors of production will be embodied in a predicted volume of trade between countries. Okay, so Hack-Shawlin model implies that some trade, export and import happen, right? Until factor price are equalized. There is a long-term trend to factor price equalization, right? So reaching factor price equalization point, trade happen between two countries. Okay, that is so. Predicted value of services from factor, so production will be embodied in a predicted volume of trade, right? But because factor prices are not equalized across countries, the predicted volume of trade is much larger than actually across. So if we think that is a missing trade concept discovered by a Canadian economist called Daniel Chapter, University of Toronto, I think. What is missing trade? Hack-Shawlin model said Korea exports this amount of good, right? And imports this amount of good. But if we look at real data, real exportation is this amount, real importation is this amount, quite smaller. This one is fitted value. How can I say? Right? Predicted value, I'm sorry. Predicted value is this one, but real export quite smaller than projected some predicted volume of trade. Can you understand? We said that is missing trade. Trade missing. Why only this one instead of this? Why only this one instead of this? Trade disappeared, missing. Okay? So the reason for missing trade in actual world appears to be the assumption of identical technology among countries. The reason for this is Why real volume smaller than predicted volume by Hex-Ohlin model? Because in real world, technology different. Okay? Technology affect the productivity of the workers and therefore the value of labor services, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you have to, missing trade is also a very important concept. Hex-Ohlin model studied by this guy showed that if you relax assumption of common technologies along with assumption underlying factor price equalization, then the prediction for the direction and volume of the factor content of trade line up well with empirical evidence and ultimately generate a good fit. In other words, Hex-Ohlin model correct if we a little more generalized. Okay? Difficulty finding support the predictions of pure Hex-Ohlin model can be blamed on some of the assumptions made. For example, technology, right? Now look at this table. If we use pure Hex-Ohlin model, right? So success, probability of success is just 0.32. If we drop assumption, common technology assumption, right? In Hex-Ohlin model dropped, then predictability increase, success probability increase. Also, we drop, countries produce the same good. Anyway, all the countries produce Q1 is not same to foreign produce Q1, right? This kind of assumption adopted, success probability increase and increase again. Finally, cost risk, we studied that a trade barrier exists, right? Trade barriers and transportation costs. If we allow that kind of thing, predictive success in Hex-Ohlin model increased to 0.91. Okay? And missing trade also like this. Explained like this. Explanation of missing trade increase and increase and increase. Can you understand? And next slide. Empirical evidence on Hex-Ohlin model. Contrast to the exports of labor abundant, skill scarce nations in the developing world with exports of skill abundant, labor scarce, rich developed nations. The exports of the 3 developing countries to the United States are concentrated in sectors within the lowest skill intensity. The exports, okay, I'd like to skip this. It's not so new. Okay, now we finish section 5, Krugman model. I'm sorry, Hex-Ohlin model. And then only one chapter left. That is chapter 6. Chapter 6 is standard trade model. Then what is standard trade model? I said standard trade model have 2 things. Number 1 component is Ricardian model. Trade happens because of differences in technology. And something happen. And Hex-Ohlin model. Hex-Ohlin model explains patterns of trade between 2 countries using the concept of factor proportion. Differences in factor abundance leads to trade between countries, right? And comparative advantage story. So if this one plus this one is standard trade model, right? But chapter 6 is we already studied chapter 6, basically. The graphical illustration of chapter 6 is perfectly same to graphical illustration of Hex-Ohlin model in the sense that production possibility frontier is not straight line, right? Curved line like this. So anyway, in the next class, I'd like to explain section 1 of chapter 6 very quickly. Then we move chapter 9. Okay? Okay, I'd like to stop here.